who were the first civilizations to set foot on our planet. Our history is written by the notes of the winners, of their power and influence over the centuries. But in a certain period of time, people from primitive hunters turned into intelligent civilizations that created monuments, calendars, and ancient writings. All this has evolved to the present day, and we are the descendants of some relatively intelligent beings. But what if it's not that simple? What if the stories told by ancient civilizations, the tales of gods and angels, of giants and great disasters, were more literal than they first appeared? What if we received ancient knowledge beyond our human understanding? If we look at some of the details, an entirely alternate history of the human race suddenly surfaces, one that completely overturns conventional knowledge and the history we've been taught. This version has mostly been consciously censored, forgotten, or worse, ignored. Until now, welcome to the new episode of Secret Origins. In the beginning of 1946, in the area currently known as the West Bank, a group of Bedouin teenagers tend their sheep and goats near the ancient settlement of Qumran. To pass the time, they toss around the stones they find strewn across the uneven desert terrain. When one of these stones is thrown into the dark side of a cave, the teenagers are shocked because they hear a loud shattering noise echoing inside. When they decide to follow their curiosity, although slightly scared, they discover a collection of large clay pots. While not realizing it at the time, these teenagers make a historical discovery of great importance. Inside the clay pots are hidden series of ancient scrolls. Subsequently, various archaeologists, historians, and treasure hunters found additional fragments of scrolls in 10 other caves in the area, bringing the total number of manuscripts found to almost 900. These manuscripts became known to the masses as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Strangely, among these manuscripts, there are large portions of a mysterious, non-canonical religious text long forgotten by human civilization, or so they thought. In our days, this text is known as the Book of Enoch. In its entirety, the Book of Enoch consists of 5 books: the Book of Watchers, the Book of Parables, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dream Visions, and the Epistles of Enoch, containing about 100 chapters altogether. These chapters tell the story of the 7th patriarch in the book of Genesis, Enoch, the father of Methuselah and the grandfather of Noah, the same Noah we know from the Bible. However, this is not the biblical story of Noah's Ark. In fact, the Book of Enoch provides an entirely different perspective on events leading up to the Great Flood of Noah's time, as that is a completely different story. It tells of the Watchers, explained in biblical terms as fallen angels, sent to earth to watch over humans at some unspecified and ancient point in time. According to one of the earliest legends related to Enoch, he is the founder of the knowledge of astronomy and he's responsible for the compilation of the solar calendar. The Bene Elohim, or the sons of God or gods, number several hundreds. They are said to descend on earth at Mount Hermon. It was a sacred place for both the Canaanites and the Jews who invaded their lands. In later times, sanctuaries of the gods Baal, Zeus, Helios, Pan, and the goddess Astarte were built on its slopes. And the term Watcher is used to describe one who watches, those who watch, those who are awake, or those who are not asleep. These names reflect the unique relationship between the Watchers and the human race since ancient times. Over time, however, they abandoned their role as observers and began to have sexual contact with some of the humans, mostly women, and began to create what we know now as hybrids or crossbreds. The Book of Enoch tells of the Nephilim, the children born through this very crossbreeding between the Watchers and the humans. The Nephilim are described as giants and savages who threatened and plundered mankind, or, to put it in other words, supernatural man-eating giants. Angered by what the Watchers had done, those described in the book as mighty gods sent the Watchers to an underground prison deep within the bowels of earth. Enoch became the mediator between the gods and the imprisoned Watchers. This further provokes the wrath of Yahweh, and according to the Bible, the consequence of this mingling between the fallen and the mortals leads to the creation of half-angelic, half-human offspring. The book describes Enoch's journeys between heaven and earth in his role as mediator, how he flies with angels and sees the rivers and the mountains and the very ends of the earth from above. Despite Enoch's intervention, the gods decide that because of what the planet has become, it and all its inhabitants must be punished. Of course, the punishment is a great flood. This flood destroys the Nephilim and leaves the Watchers in their prison. Before that, however, Enoch has been taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. This is not the only place in the biblical canon in which the Nephilim appear. The Israelites visited a land inhabited by Nephilim who were so large that they made the Israelites look like locusts. Of course, many things in the Bible are seen in modern times as allegorical, and this is more of a philosophical myth than a historical record. But there is archaeological evidence for one particular great flood in Earth's history, which is mentioned in countless religions and cultural traditions around the world. Did creatures like the Nephilim really exist? Many people say that it is just fiction and there is no evidence. But what if there is? In fact, there are numerous stories about giants in human history. The well-known traveler and explorer Marco Polo once wrote of a race of giants in Zanzibar who were so strong that they could carry as much as 4 ordinary men, while the people of modern Tangier, Morocco, once claimed that the founder of their city was a giant named Antaeus. According to an Irish myth, the so-called the Giant's Causeway on the northeast coast of Ireland, an astonishing 40,000 interlocking rock columns, was built by the Irish giant Finn McCool to cross the sea to Scotland and fight another giant. Apart from Norse legends, ancient Greek mythology is full of stories about giants. Perhaps if giants really existed, as records from countless cultures suggest, then the Book of Enoch begins to look less and less metaphorical and allegorical, less like a fantasy myth and more like a manuscript based on actual history. The idea of semi-divine heroes was born from ancient myths about alliances between gods and mortals. The poet and writer Pindar described the heroes of the past as a race between gods and men. Additional references allude to experiments that led to the creation of monsters by crossing animals of different and unrelated species. In modern theosophical occultism, there are legends of lost Atlantis, where it is claimed that its scientists bred half-human, half-animal hybrids as the slave race. Records of such events can be found in the mythologies of ancient peoples around the world, and especially among the Babylonians of Middle East. The story of Noah and the flood in the Old Testament is said to have originated in the Babylonian and Sumerian myths. It is known that around 10,000 BC, there appears to have been a catastrophic event that transformed early humanity. At the end of the last ice age, the first signs of agriculture appeared in the Middle East, with a shift from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one of a settled agriculture. It is interesting to note that for centuries, the Book of Enoch has been an important part of Christian and Jewish religious traditions. Many of these religious sects accepted the book as scripture. Furthermore, some even suggest that the Book of Enoch was the inspiration for the Book of Genesis, due to their many parallels and overlapping stories. Therefore, the question that arises is, what has happened? Why the Book of Enoch is not part of the Bible, and why does this question sound so unimportant nowadays? In attempt to answer this question, we will go back to the early centuries after the physical death of Christ, far from the 39 canons of the Old Testament and the 27 New Testament books that we today know as the Bible. Originally, there were many Gospels and religious texts that made up the broad spectrum of the Christian tradition. As the Christians started spreading after the death of Jesus, the growing Christian church gradually began to choose which texts would be read and followed, which texts would be considered divinely inspired. The church needed unity, and to create it, the establishment of an official canon was required. In Dan Brown's book Da Vinci Code, this canonization is remembered as something rather nefarious that happened at the First Council of Nicaea in the 4th century. According to the book, it was there that Emperor Constantine and the others high-ranking church authorities, led by their own secrets and desires, shaped official Christian canon. Unfortunately, this is not historically accurate. The Council of Nicaea did not send the official Christian canon, but let's not blame Dan Brown. The famous philosopher Voltaire also made a similar claim in the 18th century. Although the story is not factually accurate, it is accurate in a sense. Why? The high-ranking members of the church are certainly there, choosing what is included in the official biblical canon. They argue among themselves, portray their opponents as heretics, and almost certainly seek to expand their own power. However, all this did not happen at one particular council, but rather it was a long process that continued between the 1st and the 4th century. When the process was completed and the Bible was officially compiled, the Book of Enoch was not included. But how could something as meaningful and powerful as the Book of Enoch have been left out? Didn't they know about it? In the search for answers, one can examine other Gospels that were also censored from the final version. For example, the Gospel of Peter, a fragment of which was found in Egypt in 1886, which tells the long-missing story of the reborn Jesus leaving his tomb and includes 2 giant angels and a floating cross that says, "And they heard a voice from heaven, saying, 'You have preached to those who sleep.' And an answer was heard from the cross, 'Yes.'" Or consider the Gospel of Mary, that notorious script in which Mary Magdalene is listed not only as one of Jesus' disciples, but as his beloved, perhaps even his wife. In this Gospel, Peter asks why he and the other disciples should listen to Mary, a woman to which Matthew replies, "If the Savior has made her worthy, who are you indeed to reject her? Certainly the Savior knows her well, that's why he loved her more than us." Although censored, even forgotten by many, the Book of Enoch never truly disappeared. There is something deeper behind it and its incredible stories, something that goes beyond the familiar and ordinary, regardless of whether it is a part of the Christian canon or not. The ancient Greeks believed that Enoch and the god of wisdom Hermon were the same person. But who was he? In legends of the Jews of antiquity, Enoch is king over men who reigned exactly 243 years. He was overflowing with wisdom and the whole world consulted him. According to the ancient Egyptians, Enoch was the builder of the Great Pyramid, writes the geographer and historian Taghi ad-Din Ahmad in his work Hittat. He notes that Enoch was known among the peoples under 4 different names: Saurit, Hermes, Idris, and Enoch. For the Arabs, Idris means sage or forefather, and for Jewish as well as Christian theology, Enoch is the 7th of the 10 forefathers, one of the patriarchs. Before the flood, Enoch was the father of Methuselah, who nevertheless lived to the biblical age of 969. In the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, Enoch is mentioned with as many as 5 sentences. There we also read, "And Enoch walked after God and disappeared because God took him." Just like that, he suddenly disappears. In Hebrew, the name Enoch means initiated, enlightened, knower, and this initiate does just that. He makes sure that his knowledge does not disappear without a trace. The examples could go on, and so it is fair to ask why Enoch, regardless of his name, continues to appear in the traditions of almost all ancient civilizations. The answer may be found much further back than the Greeks, the Egyptians, or even the Babylonians, perhaps even beyond the time of ancient Sumer. According to Sumerian texts, the earth was visited by a group of supernatural beings sometime in the distant past. These visitors are described in Sumerian tradition in a way that is eerily similar to the descriptions of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. Instead of Watchers, however, the Sumerians called these beings Anunnaki, which literally means those who came from heavens. They were perceived as gods to the Sumerians, and according to modern thinkers such as Zecharia Sitchin and Erin von Däniken, they are an ancient race of extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth. Interestingly, the Sumerian texts tell stories of the Anunnaki who, like the Watchers, began to interbreed with human beings. In this process, a hybrid race with entirely new species known as the Nephilim was created. Like the gods of the Book of Enoch, the Anunnaki were angered by the state of the earth and caused a great flood. Same story told in a slightly different way. As you well remember and know, it is not the form that matters, but the content. Perhaps maybe this is the only way we can read the true codes of our reality. Could it be that the Book of Enoch, as well as other related traditions, are simply retelling the older Sumerian story of the Anunnaki? Or simply over time, the same story has been wrapped and reshaped all the way to the present? Not only that the Book of Enoch is written in first person, but the author repeatedly asserts his authorship in the text, as if he feared that future interpreters would be so limited that they would not understand him. In the first month of the 365th year, on the first day of the first month, I, Enoch, was in my house alone when 2 huge men appeared to me, the like of which I had never seen on earth. Let's consider the Agrarian Revolution that began around 10,000 BC, during which humans moved from a lifestyle of hunting and survival to farming and settlement. According to historical data, as early as 9500 BC at the lands where current Kurdistan is now, barley, wheat, rye, oats, peas and lentils were grown, and goats and sheep were domesticated. Interestingly, the Kurdish people claim to be descendants of the children of the jinn, or the children of the spirits. Is this an ancient cultural reference to the interbreeding between the Anunnaki and human women? The ancient Near East is also known as the cradle of civilization, and the earliest city-states were found in the Mesopotamia region. The region's early indigenous inhabitants, the Sumerians and the Akkadians, developed the first written language, studied astronomy, and created libraries. The Babylonians and Assyrians followed them. In the mythologies, all of these races, there are stories of how the gods came down to earth and taught them their arts and knowledge. In another passage from the Book of Enoch, Enoch testifies to the mysteries of lightning and mysteries of thunder. Some suggest that this chapter is intended to illuminate the mysteries of energy and electricity. When we hear energy and electricity, we cannot help but mention Nikola Tesla, who, let's not forget, said the following: "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." It may sound ridiculous or hard to believe that such mind-blowing stories as those of the Watchers, the Anunnaki, and the Nephilim Giants have been forgotten. The Sumerians ignored or even deleted deliberately from the pantheon of ancient civilizations. The Book of Enoch, along with the Gospel of Mary and Thomas, also censored from the biblical canon. However, given the way these stories fundamentally change our understanding of human history by presenting a new or well-forgotten old perspective on who we really are, their exclusion is perhaps no surprise at all. But these stories have not been completely erased. If we look at one of the most famous stories known to mankind, the one about Adam, Eve, and the Garden of Eden, if we read the text not literally nor philosophically, but as an allegory, metaphorically, God creates Adam to watch over the earth, just as the gods send the watchers to do so in the Book of Enoch. From Adam's rib, God created Eve. Adam and Eve reproduced, representing the crossbreeding between the watchers and human women. Adam and Eve were said to be able to eat anything they wanted in the Garden of Eden, except for the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Of course, they tried the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, which symbolizes the watchers who bring advanced technology and knowledge to human beings who may not have been mentally developed enough to handle it on their own. When the two taste the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Heaven, they are said to become aware of each other. Their first realization is that their physical cloaks of flesh are bare. They rush to cover their genitals because they have realized the so-called serpent power or kundalini, which can be educated through intercourse and non-reproductive sexual acts. They tasted from the tree of life, which initiates the cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth, and of the human souls incarnating into physical form. By reading the story of Adam and Eve in this way, it is easy to see the parallels between the story itself, the Book of Enoch, and other ancient writings. And maybe that was exactly the goal. Perhaps those who wrote the story of Adam and Eve were simply retelling the stories in the Book of Enoch in their own way, retelling the Sumerian story of the Anunnaki like so many other religions and cultures, inserting this important part of human history allegorically into their own religious canon, so that these ancient records may continue to exist through time, and though in a different form, be reminded of us so that we may one day remember our own history, not by the human way, but by the cosmic human lifeline. What is human history? Is it what we know from officially approved history books, or is it something deeper, something more incredible, something forgotten? Maybe the answers have been in front of our eyes all this time. Have you ever wondered why in school we learn so little about one of the first civilizations on our planet? The Sumerian Civilization, for example. Did you know that they created a calendar based on the moon cycles, the wheel, the glass, and the sailboat? They are the first society that uses canals, creates maps of its cities and lands, use makeup and jewelry before the Egyptians, and even create beer with over 500 different recipes. They're believed to have spoken the first language in general, and most importantly left the first written evidence. For the time period we're talking about, this is one very advanced civilization. Then why don't we talk more about them? We dare to say that if we get to know our history well and deeply, we'll be extremely good prepared for what lies ahead. Despite all of this, to this day, the eternal debate between historians and archaeologists continues over which one was the first civilization to set foot on our planet and where do we come from. Is the human civilization created by a gods called the Anunnaki? Today, we'll try to find out together in the new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome. Interestingly, the Sumerians are creators of extremely advanced inventions, and we learn and talk about them as if they were part of some famous mythology. Well, if we pay enough attention to their recorded story, we would have known a completely different version of our existence. Here's what their notes say about the past of our civilization. In 1949, British archaeologists discovered 14 plates in Sumer. Today, they are known as the most ancient records in history, dating back to the 24th century BC. It is true that what they write is very similar to other civilizations we know, but the interesting moment is when they mention the father of every beginning, or rather some kind of super sovereign being. In the plates is told that in the beginning of all, Adam, Eve, the Garden of Eden, these are polytheistic deities, or not from here. The whole of the first two plates explain who they are and where they came from, and the third for the sixth day of creation then continues with how the human race was genetically manipulated from these beings, and its evolution is not at the whim of fate. According to Sumerians themselves, all that they used as technology and development came from these creatures. Before the Greek and the Egyptian gods, there were those worshipped by Sumerians in Mesopotamia. They were worshipped by the Sumerians. Their name comes from An, the chief god who rules all the other gods. They were celestial deities, and according to Babylonian myths, there were 300 Anunnaki guardians of the heavens and 300 Anunnaki guardians of the underworld. According to the ancient texts, 445,000 years ago, the gods' creators came to Earth. At that time, there were only untamed animals and very ancient version of the first people. Anunnaki also translates into those who came from heaven to earth. They lived on the distant planet Nibiru, which orbits our solar system for a period of 3,600 years. They describe it as a place multiplied many times the diameter of the planet Earth, full of iron oxide, which makes it mostly red in color. Nibiru is a gas giant plasma and was once like the Earth, green and beautiful, but the irrational activity of its inhabitants gradually transformed it in a burning sphere. Translated, its name means the point of intersection ford, something like a door. It is supposed that it's an artificial asteroid that has been used as a vehicle and was probably carved from the inside like a comet or an asteroid. According to the plates, Nibiru's atmosphere began to deteriorate and the atmosphere was no longer suitable for any conditions for living. To restore it, they needed a very valuable resource, gold. And here are a few interesting facts in this regard. It is proven that nanoparticles, for example, gold can repair and restore the ozone layer. Practically, it becomes like a radiation shield, which explains why NASA uses gold foil in their space stations. In 2008, in a cave in the Iraqi desert, a tomb was discovered, intact, worthy of a true king, full of all kinds of gold treasures, and in the middle was found a black stone sarcophagus with Sumerian inscriptions. When the sarcophagus was opened, scientists have come across a 3-meter giant with long fading signs of life, adorned with a huge amount of gold jewelry. Interesting moment is that the mummy looked as if it had fallen asleep 2 hours ago, and of course it's believed that this is one of these so-called gods, Anunnaki. Scholars find profound similarities between the myths of the Anunnaki and the Nephilim. In 1971, Edward Lipinski published a scientific analysis of several ancient texts, including an Old Babylonian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. They all contain important details, revealing the real location of the sanctuary of the Anunnaki in the sense of the ancient Eastern thought and cosmology. What Lipinski finds that is actually the Old Babylonian version of the Epic Gilgamesh identifies Mount Hermon in Lebanon as the dwelling of the Anunnaki. He underlines 12 to 21 of the Old Babylonian Gilgamesh, which narrate the destruction of Humbaba, guardian of the proclamation of the gods. After Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu penetrated the forest and opened the sacred sanctuary and abode of the Anunnaki. In later mythologies, of course, we have different locations for the Anunnaki home. Lipinski explains that the oldest texts of Mesopotamia and the Near Eastern Canaan point to the cedar forest in the mountain Hermon. Traces of older culture can be found mentioning the mountain was the abode of the gods and whose access to it was hidden by the cedar forest, whose guardian is Humbaba. The mountain was, in our opinion, anti-Lebanon, Hermon. Therefore, the southern part of anti-Lebanon is probably the mountain where the Anunnaki lived, according to the ancient Babylonian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Thus, Mountain Hermon was supposed to be the home of the gods. Lipinski also points out that the mountain was very important. He says it is a cosmic mountain that connects heaven and earth. The same concept is hidden in an episode from the Book of Enoch, in which the sons of God, the heavenly beings, gather on the top of Mount Hermon because this is the mountain of the gods. Hermon Peak is located at the southern end of the anti-Lebanon mountain chain, crossing the borders of Syria and Lebanon. The highest peak of Hermon reaches 2,832 meters, and the area abounds in ancient altars and sanctuaries. Interestingly, some of them were used in the time of Constantine the Great. When the Anunnaki arrived, they could live for thousands of years, as they set a gold mining station called Eriduk, Earth Station 1 in the Persian Gulf, under the leadership of Enki. The curious thing is that they were not alone and they did take someone, another race. They called them Igigi, who worked like slaves and mined gold for the Anunnaki, and these stories coincident with the Babylonian plates from the 18th century BC. When the humanoid gods carried the loads and the burden, the gods' output was great. The great Anunnaki made Igigi do all the work. After a long time, centuries of work, Igigi decides to oppose their masters, thinking they have any chance at all to oppose them. Guess what? They're brutally mistaken. The defeat destroys almost the whole race, and this leaves the Anunnaki with no workforce. Thinking of new options, the master of all Anu orders his son Enki to create a genetically new race of slaves that is intelligent enough to cope with technological work, but at the same time to obey the Anunnaki. A ton of experiments eventually led to a successful result: hybrid between caveman Homo erectus and the Anunnaki themselves. The hybrid we know very well today, known as Homo sapiens. The plates describe the first such hybrid or man as Adamo. In Hebrew, Adamo means human. Anunnaki continued their work by placing Homo sapiens in the mines of Mesopotamia. The Semitic word avod literally means working for someone or something. According to these ancient texts, the Anunnaki who we know have lived for thousands of years are even quite taller than Homo sapiens, practically straight giants. Because the meaning of their existence was to serve the Anunnaki, they in return learned many social and technological skills. Since Homo sapiens reduced, it was necessary that they could reproduce, which later led to overpopulation, and most of those who had been evicted from their homes began to tell the story of the Garden of Eden and that they were ousted from heaven on earth. As time goes on, our civilization becomes more and more intelligent, and some of the Anunnaki were in contact with the people. The result of these love interactions were called Nephilims. According to the Bible, the Nephilims, the fallen ones, were the offspring of sexual relations between sons of God and human daughters. One of the most mentioned ancient texts that describe the Nephilim is the Book of Enoch, which is believed to have been written by the patriarch Enoch, son of Jared, father of Methuselah. Today, this book is considered an apocryphal text and it's rejected by most Christian churches, but it hasn't been always like this. Many of the early church fathers, such as Athenagoras, Clement of Alexandria, Irenaeus, and Tertullian, have taken parts of this book. Fragments of it in Aramaic were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Judah, in his own gospel, quotes the Book of Enoch. It is believed that the New Testament has at least several hundred references from its records. The plates say that all this enraged the Anunnaki leader Enlil, who is the brother of Enki, and he wanted to ensure that no one would ever reach to the strength and potential to rule Nibiru, but that was beyond his control. The human civilization had grown so much that forced nature to intervene to maintain balance. During one of these cycles, at 3600 BC, Nibiru's orbit created catharsis or devastation on the sun and earth. Nibiru is called the Destroyer in the Colburn Bible, which is a collection of ancient texts hidden for centuries. It is believed to have been written by various authors. The descriptions sound more scientific than a myth. For example, inside it says that the cause of the global flood was a comet strike and more. People forgot the days of the destroyer. Only the wise know where he went and that he'll return at a certain time. The destroyer, its bright color and the ferocious and ever-changing appearance, a cruel body of flames. The plates describe exactly one catastrophic event that happened when Nibiru approached the planet Earth. First, black spots appeared on the surface of the Sun, the magnetic field on Earth became much weaker and the ice began to melt. This event, of course, we know today as the Great Flood. For many days before the Great Flood, the Earth suffered as if it was in great pain. Many nights before the disaster, in the heavens Nibiru was seen as a shining star. Apparently the ruler knew about this cycle and what would happen. That's why he leaves the planet Earth, seeing the opportunity to erase the unworthy, according to him, of course. But many of the Anunnaki decided to stay next to the people, watching the Great Flood in their heavenly boats, as they described them, circling the Earth. At this time, the great glaciers of the South Pole are melting and falling into the ocean. This forms a multitude tsunamis from the north to the gold mines in Africa. The flood continues until it reaches the city of the gods, one of the first places where the Anunnaki lived, and now perhaps located somewhere at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. Seeing the cataclysm, Enki felt concerned for their own creatures and instructed his chosen ones to build boats to survive the flood. One of the chosen that leads humanity to a new age, as you may have guessed, is Noah and his family. The big storm with the heavy rains started, the waves were wild and did not stop for 7 days until they finally calmed. But the rains lasted another 40 days and nights, and the story of the Great Flood is recorded in almost every civilization on our planet. After the flood, the plates tell how the Anunnaki built their buildings in complete compliance with the location of the stars. When the Anunnaki left the planet Earth, their legacy was literally scattered throughout the planet, Mesopotamia, India, and South America as their last gift to humanity, of course, the Sumerian Civilization. According to Zecharia Sitchin, the mass exodus of the Anunnaki took place about 6,000 years ago. Before they left, they decided to give humanity a final impetus, which partly explains the emergence of the Sumerian civilization, which is extremely intelligent, cultured, and erudite for its time, as if it came out of nowhere. But was it really out of nowhere? The Anunnaki taught the Sumerians their way of life and created royal dynasties. The king acted as their messenger on Earth and had the task to rule his people. This chosen bloodline was additionally enhanced by the genes of the Anunnaki, and they were trained in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and technology development. This theory, of course, has been met with great skepticism by science, and in support of his theory, Sitchin relies on several ancient manuscripts and discoveries. The Babylonian epic of creation Enuma Elish tells how our solar system was formed. According to this epic, the Earth did not yet exist when a wandering planet called Nibiru was captured by the gravitational field of the Sun. Then, Nibiru collided with Tiamat, a planet that once was located between Mars and Jupiter. Of course, there are also many artifacts of extraterrestrial origin, such as the Baghdad batteries or the Saqqara bird. According to Sitchin, these artifacts are due to a very ancient and very advanced civilization. We also have the proof of the gold processing of the Anunnaki discovered in Mount Hare by Flinders Petrie in 1889. Archaeological excavations in the ancient Mesopotamian city of Nineveh have revealed 400 intact clay tablets from the Ashurbanipal library. These tablets describe in details the activities of the Anunnaki. The tablets show the location of genetic laboratories of the Anunnaki in Central and East Africa, the location of these labs and the time they have functioned amazingly aligns with the views of modern science about the origin of the first modern people. And even more interesting is that in these areas they have discovered gold mines more than 100,000 years old. One of the tablets depicts the solar system just as we know it today. But how is it possible to have had knowledge of objects so far from our land, given that they have just discovered agriculture and the wheel, for example? The tablet dates back 5,000 years before we realized that the planets move around the sun. And when we talk about the first telescope, we know that in 1608, the glasses manufacturer Hans Lippershey requests the first patent in the Netherlands for an instrument that sees far. Although he may not be the first man to ever build something like a telescope, he is considered the inventor of the telescope because he was the first to apply for a patent. Lippershey's device and others such as Jake Metlos's device could zoom objects only about 3 times. It took the efforts of the famous Italian scientist Galileo Galilei, who built a better telescope and used it, of course, to study the stars. Galileo learned about the new device in 1609, and without seeing it, he created his version. But how so without any means they knew with accuracy the layout of the solar system and the stars? The Anunnaki passed on their knowledge to the Sumerians and created monarchs. The kings ruled as their representatives on earth and respected, noticed. It is believed that the royal bloodlines were genetically made by the Anunnaki, and some speculate that exactly they successfully have managed to control humanity precisely through these chosen blood connections for millennia. Others claim that when the planet Nibiru approaches Earth again, they will return to continue their reign. And that would pretty well explain the well-kept secrets around the history of the entire Sumerian civilization. European folklore is rich with stories of giants fighting and building monumental stone structures. Legends of giants can be found in all cultures and eras. It is crucial to re-examine the evidence with an open mind. The mainstream academic community claims that giants, cyclops, and other similar creatures are mere myths, and that bones believed to be giants' bones are actually those of prehistoric animals. This is the commonly accepted stance when discussing ancient giants, but it appears there may be more to the story than many are willing to acknowledge. We will first take a look at the Bible and see if it tells us anything about giants. In the time after the Great Flood, the Bible tells of 36 tribes of giants fighting for control of the Holy Land. These giant tribes were the descendants of the Nephilim, beings created from a cross between the fallen angels, also described in the Book of Enoch as the Watchers, and human women. In an attempt to destroy the deeds done by the Watchers, the gods sent a flood to restore human civilization. However, some of the Nephilim survived. One of these giant tribes that survived the flood was the Amalekites, who originated in the southern Arabia before migrating to modern Israel. Given their role in ancient history, it seems reasonable that the Amalekites had a pure strain of Nephilim DNA running through their giant veins. Numbers 13:28 confirm that the Amalekites were not only ancient but also directly related to the Nephilim, the oldest race of giants that gave birth to the Anakim, or sons of Anak. The Emim lived there in past times, and people great, numerous and tall like the Anakim, who were also accounted giants as the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. That was also regarded as land of giants. Giants formerly dwelt there, but the Ammonites called them Zamzumim. The Rephaim, also known as Anakites or Aim, were a giant biblical people who lived during the time of Abraham. They inhabited both Palestine and Moab. The Moabites called them Emimami, and the Ammonites called them Zamzumim. They're also referred to as Anakites, or the sons of Anak or Enoch in the Bible. The prophet Isaiah stated that the Lord had destroyed the Rephaim and erased all memory of them. However, the names of the megalith Wheel of Spirits and the Valley of the Rephaim in Israel remain as a reminder of them. In the 1930s, a collection of giant bones was discovered on Mount Carmel in Israel, but they have since disappeared and attention was directed towards new discoveries of Neanderthal bones. It is possible that the authorities did not want to acknowledge that the bones could have belonged to the Nephilim or one of their descendants. Despite this, the Bible lists 22 giants by name, including Arba, Og, Bielasat, Augeas, Gog, Magog, Gog-Magog, and most of these giants were rulers and kings. Perhaps the most famous ancient giant from the Bible is the legendary Goliath. In Kings 17:4, it is said, "A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves and a bronze javelin was slung on his back." The story of David and Goliath, while now primarily seen as a children's tale, was once considered to be based on historical events. Another ancient giant is the legendary Gilgamesh, considered the first hero of the ancient world and the historical builder and ruler of the city of Uruk nearly 5,000 years ago. The poem that tells his story is the Epic of Gilgamesh, is the oldest known epic poem in existence and also includes a flood myth almost identical to the one found in the Bible thousands of years later. Gilgamesh was the son of the goddess Ninsun and the king priest Lugul Banda. He ruled for 126 years and had superhuman strength. In the epic, Gilgamesh is described as famous for his great stature and surpassing all other kings. And on clay tablets, he is depicted as an extremely tall man holding a lion in his hand. If we compare the length of the lion to the height of the depicted Gilgamesh, he should be about 5 meters tall. Mysterious monuments and tales of giants can be found in ancient Egypt as well as depicted in hieroglyphs on the walls of ancient temples. Some of the pharaohs' depictions show a significant difference in height compared to the normal people, suggesting the possibility of giants rather than artistic expression. In 1881, Professor Timmerman discovered a series of tombs containing the remains of a prehistoric race of giants while examining the ruins of an ancient temple of Isis on the banks of the Nile, 16 miles below Notjar Jafar. The smallest skeleton found was 7 feet 8 inches long, while the largest was 11 feet 1 inch or about 310 centimeters. In 2001, Howard University archaeologists excavated the Giza Mulhorn giant skeleton from a tomb in Cemetery 2500 in western Giza. The skeleton measured 6.5 feet, but its skull and jawbone were unusually large, leading mainstream academia to declare it as the first known case in ancient Egypt about giants. However, the skull was kept hidden from the academia and the remaining bones were quickly covered up. Additionally, hundreds of giant sarcophagi were discovered, but they were empty. The possibility of giants existing could explain how some of the massive megalith structures around the world were built, as they currently have no known explanation for how they were moved. One example of a massive megalith structure that could have been built by giants is the Southern Stone in Baalbek, Lebanon, which weighs a staggering 1,242 tons. In southern Siberia, researchers have found a massive wall of granite stones on Mount Sharia. Some of these giant granite boulders are estimated to weigh over 3,000 tons, which is more than twice the weight of those in Lebanon, raising questions about how they were arranged. It's noteworthy that the original name of Stonehenge was the Ring of the Giants. Stonehenge is a later Saxon name meaning hanging stones. In Syria, at the ancient temple of Ain Dara, several large footprints measuring 3 feet in length can be found in the courtyard leading to the shrine of the temple. These footprints suggest the existence of a giant who was at least 4-6 meters tall. In 2005, a group of Russian scientists led by Professor Ernst Moldavshev announced that they had found numerous graves of giants near the site of the giants' footprints in Ain Dara, as well as throughout Syria. However, due to various reasons such as political and ideological, they were unable to excavate them. Giants are also part of Celtic, Greek, Roman, Hindu, Buddhist, Scandinavian, and Japanese folklore. Irish mythology is rich with stories of giants, such as the legend of the giant seafaring Fomorians and their leader Balor. According to the legend, they came to Irish shores after surviving the Great Flood. The origins of Balor and his Fomorians is unknown, but some scholars suggest they may have originated from Atlantis. The ancient British lands of England, Scotland, and Wales are home to numerous megalithic monuments, with legends claiming they were built by survivors of Atlantis. Ancient Britain was even known as Albion, named after one of the giant kings of Atlantis. It's possible that Atlantis was part of Ireland at some point in prehistory. Some scientists theorize that an Irish Atlantis was submerged by a flood caused by a rock comet, which caused Earth's crust to shift. The surviving Atlantean giants may have then been responsible for the structures found in Europe and beyond. As the exploration of the coast of America began, Spanish navigators also reported sightings of living giants. During their expeditions to the Americas, 3 Spanish ship captains, as well as Sir Francis Drake and Captain John Smith, reported encountering beings taller than the native population. Here is what Captain John Smith writes about them. Upon this river inhabit a people called Susquehannock. 60 of them came to the discoverers with skins, bows, arrows, targets, beads, swords, and tobacco pipes for presents. Such great and well-proportioned men are seldom seen, for they seemed like giants to the English. In 1519, Spanish explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda mapped the northern coastline of the Gulf of Mexico, noting various rivers, bays, landmarks, and potential harbors. Near where the Mississippi River flows into the Gulf of Mexico, he discovered a large city and around 40 nearby villages. Pineda described the tribes that settled near the river as a race of giants from 10 to 11 palms high and a race of pygmies only 5 or 6 palms high. Perhaps the most well-known and intriguing account of true giants from the age of exploration is from the famous Portuguese explorer Fernando Magellan. Between 1519 and 1522, Magellan embarked on his most famous voyage, an ambitious expedition to search for a good route to the Maluku Islands in the East Indies, which were the key to the strategically important and highly profitable spice trade. The voyage eventually led to the first successful circumnavigation of the globe. Magellan was in command of 5 ships, and when they reached the southern tip of South America in the distant land of Patagonia, the expedition encountered a puzzling sight. Here is an excerpt from the diary of Antonio Pigafetta, Magellan's official chronicler. Leaving this place, we at least reached 49.5 degrees to the Antarctic Pole. As it was winter, the ships entered a safe harbor for wintering. We spent 2 months in this place without seeing anyone, but one day, without anyone expecting it, we saw a giant who was on the shore, quite naked, and who danced, leaped, and sang. While he sang, he threw sand and dust on his head. Our captain sent one of his men toward him, charging him to leap and sing like the other in order to reassure him and to show him friendship, which he did. Immediately, the man of the ship started dancing, led this giant to a small island where the captain awaited him. And when he was before us, he began to marvel and to be afraid, and he raised one finger upward, believing that we came from heaven. And he was so tall that the tallest of us only came up to his waist. He was well proportioned. The captain named the people of this sort Pathagoni. It's important to note that the above account is taken from the journal of the official chronicler of Magellan's voyage of discovery. This is the person tasked with recording and maintaining the most accurate records of events and activities, whether exotic or mundane. This man is responsible not only to the commander of the voyage, but also to the king and the country for his eyewitness accounts as a full, precise, and accurate testimony of the events that occurred during the voyage. Given his position and responsibilities, can we trust his testimony about encounters with giants to be accepted as factual information from an impeccable witness? Some years later, in 1539, an account by Hernando de Soto, another explorer, appeared describing how he came across numerous giants during his travels through the southeastern part of what is now the United States. De Soto set out from Tampa Bay, Florida, with a group of hundreds of men, and along his road, he said to have frequently encountered tribes of natives ruled by giants. One of these was Chief Tuscaloosa, who was found in western Alabama and was said to be a towering giant of man who was taller than everyone else. The conquistador Francisco Coronado also recorded meeting entire tribes of giants during his missions through the Southwest in search of the legendary El Dorado. In some cases, physical evidence of these giants has been found as well, reportedly the case with the conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who served under Hernán Cortés during the Spanish conquest of Mexico. In the pages of his detailed record of the conquest and subsequent collapse of the Aztec Empire, there is a strange account of a race of giants about which the Tlaxcaltec Indians claimed once inhabited the area. According to the conquistadors, the native people they encountered told stories passed down from their ancestors about very tall men and women with huge bones who once lived among them. They said these giants were bad people with bad customs, so they fought against them and killed them, and those who remained disappeared. To demonstrate how large were giants, the native people brought the conquistadors the leg bone of one giant, which was the height of an ordinary man. The conquistadors were amazed by these bones and believed that there must have been giants in this land. There are still many accounts of real giants fought throughout the Americas during the Age of Exploration, but they have largely been forgotten over time. However, some evidence of these giants remains in the form of megalith structures and carvings, which are literally written in stone. One such example is the giant footprint in South Africa, which is considered to be the most spectacular rock footprint ever found on Earth. It was discovered in 1931 by a farmer named Stoffel Katzi while he was hunting. The footprint is around 4 feet, suggesting the creature that left it would have been 24 to 27 feet tall. The locals referred to it as the God footprint or Goliath's footprint, and there are stories of ancient giants throughout the region. Skeptics argue that the giant footprint was formed by natural erosion, but Professor Peter Wagner of the University of Port Elizabeth in South Africa suggests that it's more likely that little green men arrived from space than it was created by natural erosion. Based on the accounts and discoveries listed, it is possible that giants may have existed in the past. During the 19th and early 20th century, in the United States, almost every year there were reports of the discovery of ancient giant skeletons in the newspapers. It was not uncommon for people to come across news stories such as a skull of heroic size and unique shape found among the valleys of the Red River. Today, However, no news media mentions anything about ancient giants or bone finds, and if a giant skeleton is found somewhere, it is certainly classified and hidden from the public. Is it possible that somewhere in some remote place a species of these enigmatic creatures is still alive, hiding from mankind? We cannot end this episode without mentioning the most famous encounter with giants that didn't happen in ancient times, but in 2002 actually. This event, which is still classified by the US government, was revealed on a popular radio show after witnesses to the event anonymously told their stories. The events took place in 2002 in the deserts of Afghanistan, where a US Army squad went missing and another special operations team was sent to investigate their whereabouts. Upon arrival, the soldiers found an entrance to a large cave surrounded by broken American military equipment and scattered equipment with blood stains. According to the story, the squad was about to enter the cave to search for the missing soldiers when a 13-foot-tall, red-haired humanoid with double fangs appeared and attacked them. According to witnesses, the giant impaled one of the soldiers with its long spear, killing him on the spot before the rest of the squad managed to take him down by shooting him in the face for 30 seconds. After the giant falls dead, the task force enters the caves and finds the remains of human bones, leading the military to think the creature is a cannibal. When the incident was reported to headquarters, the giant's body was bagged and loaded into a helicopter and flown to a secret location in the US for examination. The giant weighed about 500 kilograms according to the team's estimate. He was dressed and shot in animal skins. If there really was a living giant that hid for so many years in the caves of Afghanistan without being discovered, is it possible that he was not the only one of his kind living on this planet? So, is there any evidence of giants living among us today? Some people claim that there are still giant skeletons buried deep in the earth waiting to be discovered, and that some of them have been found and kept secret by the government. Others argue that the stories of giants are nothing more than myths and legends. Regardless of what you believe, one thing is for sure. The topic of giants is a fascinating one, and there is still so much we don't know about them. Theories about their origin, existence, and ultimate fate continue to be debated. It is important to keep an open mind and continue to research and explore all possibilities. The evidence from the prehistoric era on the walls of the Temple of Edfu, situated between Luxor and Aswan in Upper Egypt, is really interesting. This temple is believed to have been built in 237–257 BC. Scientists consider the texts on the wall the few surviving fragments that explain the beginning of the cosmos. Professor Raymond from the University of Manchester tells us that these texts contain hidden references and messages. It's about certain mythical events, which is why the laying of the cornerstone, the construction and the functioning of the historic temple are all set in the same mythical era. The temple was believed to be a creation of the gods, which leads us to the conclusion that according to the ideas of that time, it was an immediate continuation, projection and reflection of the mythical temple that had existed since the beginning of the world. Now, the phrase "from the beginning of the world" could mean the first age, which the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi. In the same era, Thoth recorded the words of the wise men and delivered them in a book that described the location of specific sacred mounts along the Nile. The title of this lost book is Description of Mounts of the Ancient Times. The ancient inscriptions on the walls of temple referred to a group of 7 wise men. They were the only divine beings who knew how to build temples and sacred cities, and they supervised the construction works on the ancient hill, as they call it. Interestingly enough, Many experts equate the ancient hill on the rocks with the location of the pyramids of Giza. Another such place is Heliopolis, as there was a sacred peak or a hill from which the first sunrise had been seen. It sounds so beautiful. Thoth himself participated in the activity of wise men, and together they are believed to have built the first mythical temples of ancient times, including the Egyptian pyramids, as Thoth himself recounts in his emerald tablets. Modern archaeologists have little information about the seven and their identity, having concluded only that they are 7 in number and have an important role in the theory of the origin of the world's first sacred sites. Another interesting thing are the depictions of the flood, described as primordial waves from which the prehistoric hill rises. The first thing that comes to mind is the legend of Noah, but the 7 wise men appear also in other legends, which raises the question, did they really exist, or are they a fragment of someone's imagination? For example, there is scientific literature about the origin of the 7 sages, who after a natural calamity appear as heralds of knowledge. But all over the world there are extremely detailed legends, which is a paradox. The most famous story is that of the flood, according to which one of the gods decided to destroy the civilization because of its corruption. Moses left us one of the stories of what happened in the first book of the Old Testament. As in other legends, each time there is a chosen one, in this case a man, a couple or a few people who need to survive are warned of the impending disaster. If, however, we remove the mythical embellishments, what's left is a historical work that offers an explanation of the development of humanity's past. But the story of Noah, who laid the foundations for a better humanity by defeating the flood, cannot be precisely dated, so it's difficult to assign it to a specific historical time. Also, since 1872, discoveries have been made that suggest that the biblical account of the flood is borrowed from older sources, such as those from the archaic deity Aya, and therefore is essentially of Egyptian origin. It is closely related to Min and Set. In fact, in 1849, the British archaeologist Sir Austin Layard and his assistant Harmust Rassan discovered several brick-covered mounds at Huyunjiu, which prompted them executive further. In September the same year, the two discovered almost 25,000 clay tablets covered with cuneiform inscriptions. The clay tablets contain spiritual and scientific works on philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. They also accounted a number of ancestors of the kings who ruled the country before and those who ruled after a great flood disaster. And these tablets contained Mesopotamia's greatest work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the legend of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian hero, who was 2/3 a god and 1/3 man and claimed he was immortal like the gods. If you haven't watched our episode about the Anunnaki, watch it so that you can make a link to the demigods. German Assyriologist Professor Theodor Quasman of the University of Cologne was able to find the first line of this work. He found them in the basement of the British Museum in London, and the clay tablet read, "Gilgamesh, who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land, who knew the world's ways, was wise in all things." The Epic of Gilgamesh was engraved in the form of a poem on 12 clay tablets. It only managed to survive because the newly arrived conquerors of Mesopotamia did not consider cuneiform a writing. The quatrains, 200 in number, contain striking similarities to the Bible, only they were written several millennia before it. The archaeologists who made this discovery didn't realize how sensational it was and wrapped it badly before they shipped it to Britain for translation. Therefore, due to the incompetent treatment, many of the tiles were damaged and could no longer be read. It was only thanks to the work of George Smith, a previously unknown young employee of the British Museum in London, that the historical significance of these ancient legends became clear. At that time, however, no one in the so-called scholarly world knew that there was a Babylonian Assyrian literature that deserved to be ranked alongside the great achievements of later writers. Young Smith has just reached the spot when Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu successfully defeated the fiery bull Humbaba in the cedar forest of present-day Lebanon. On her triumph return, the goddess Ishtar saw Gilgamesh dressed in his festive robes, wearing the victor's crown, and fell in love with him. He, on the contrary, didn't wish to know anything about his admirer and insulted her, calling her a prostitute, for she already had many love affairs. After this humiliation, Ishtar returned angered to heaven and complained to the great goddess. Then she demanded from her father Anu the death of Gilgamesh. In response, Anu created a bull of heaven on earth, whom 100 warriors could not tame, but Gilgamesh stood the test and was victorious again with the help of his friend Enkidu. Ishtar, who watched the fight from heaven, cursed Gilgamesh and Enkidu. On the night that followed, Enkidu saw in a dream the council of the gods condemning him because he had aided Gilgamesh in the destruction of Humbaba. The sentence was immediately carried out, and Enkidu died that very night from an incurable disease. Gilgamesh mourned for his friend, but at the thought that he too was about to die, he shuddered with fear, and then he remembered a distant relative to whom the gods had granted immortality. Gilgamesh set out in search of Utnapishtim, but just when everything was about to become clear, the story ended. Smith found out that this was just one part of the inscriptions, and the story of the immortal Utnapishtim was present only partially. The clay tablets with the continuation of this epic were hidden somewhere in the chambers of the palace of Nineveh. In fact, Smith was excited to discover almost the moment in the story when Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh about the time before the Great Flood. Of course, what he had read so far of the Epic of Gilgamesh kept bugging him. Smith was discouraged because he wanted to go to Nineveh at all costs to continue his research. But that cost a lot of money, and for a simple employee like him, it was very difficult to secure funding. Besides, who would agree to help find the clay tablets that might contain evidence that the Bible doesn't offer the oldest information, and even more, it's not the only source? However, a London benefactor invested about 1,000 genuis, about 40,000 euros in George Smith's venture and challenge. It was the London's Daily Telegraph, which showed risk-prone interest in the young's research reports, making our access to ancient knowledge possible. On December 3, 1872, George Smith announced his discovery to an astonishment audience of the London Society of Biblical Archaeology. Even if the ladies and gentlemen were not particularly delighted with the discovery and even maligned Smith, they couldn't distract the enthusiastic explorer from his enterprise. Consequently, the research team set out for Nineveh in early 1873. Immediately upon arrival, Smith began excavation. His will was extraordinary, and in a huge pile of rubble, George Smith found 384 pieces of clay tablets, including the missing parts of the story of Utnapishtim. and the tiles tell us, long before the flood of the Euphrates River, there was a city of Shuruppak when the gods decided to flood the land. The god Ea, who participated in the Council of the Gods, chose to be a guardian of the man Utnapishtim and decided to warn him of the impending disaster. Man of Shuruppak, give up your wealth and build a ship to save your life. Take all kinds of seeds with you on the ship. The measures by which you shall build are well calculated. That confirmed Smith's assumption that the man was experiencing the same thing as Noah from the Bible. The Mesopotamian legends were more detailed and contained considerably more additional information than the Old Testament. Later in that story, Gilgamesh did find his relative Utnapishtim and asked him how he too could achieve the immortality of the gods. Tell me, how did you gain access to the gods' council and how did you gain eternal life? After Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim talked for a while, the latter told him that the gods had a strange place where a miraculous flower grew that made him immortal like the gods. I'll let Gilgamesh know what's hidden. I will tell you a secret of the gods. There is a plant there. You can prick on it like on a thorn. The two of them set out on their way to the eastern sea to get the flower. According to the legend, the submarine-like vehicle was sailing on the water or under it, and a few days later it finally reached its destination. Perhaps the travelers were using a submarine because in the legend Utnapishtim pointed out the plant's location on the seabed and then showed Gilgamesh a type of plant and explained its property. These plants are magical herbs and bring back youth to people. In 1876, after 3 years of hard work, George Smith returned to England where he published his innovative for the time theory regarding the Bible. Noah and Utnapishtim are, in reality, the same man who was struck by that same natural disaster. Sadly, George died when he was only 36 and he couldn't witness the triumph of the geological confirmation of his theory by Sir Charles Leonard Woolley. In August 1998, after many years of research, Dr. William Ryan of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, using the 20th century technology, once again confirmed Charles Woolley's results. According to them, after the warming of the northern hemisphere, the water from the melting glaciers had raised to the level of the ocean to such an extent that the former land strip between Europe and Asia Minor had broken off the Bosphorus. According to Dr. Ryan's theory, the Black Sea did not yet exist, but around its deepest point there was a freshwater lake whose shores were inhabited by people. Around 8,900 BC, the Mediterranean Sea must have overflowed the former lake, which today can still be found at the bottom of the Black Sea with a force 200 times greater than that of the Niagara Falls. For 2 years, about 16 cubic kilometers of seawater kept flowing into the Black Sea every day, so that the sea level was rising about 15 centimeters a day. In that flood-like disaster, the lake expanded by 2 kilometers in 1 day. Dr. Ryan concludes, out of this hell could have arisen the biblical flood. Also, on September 28, 1999, the discoverer of Titanic, James Ballard, stated that he only wanted to penetrate to a depth of 140 meters to find on the seabed some well-preserved ships from biblical times. In the summer of 2000, the explorer did indeed succeed in discovering the remains of ancient buildings in the vicinity of the northern Turkish town of Sinop. There once lived people who must have left their dwellings fleeing for their lives. Interestingly, with all these facts, we'd better consider that neither the Old Testament nor the cuneiforms are telling us about a natural disaster, but about a punishment controlled by the gods. Furthermore, the texts are talking about a worldwide flood and not just localized to a particular area. Maybe the real cause of the worldwide catastrophe actually came from heaven. Furthermore, there are more than 300 flood legends in the world, which always refer to the Great Deluge as well as to Chosen One appointed by the gods and to the building of a corresponding ark. The inscriptions on the walls of the Temple of Edfu tell us that the 7 wise men came from a small island that was destroyed by the Great Flood. Besides, all the inscriptions at Edfu say that they came from an island, the homeland of the first people, and the island was destroyed by a flood. Most of the inhabitants drowned and the few survivors settled in Egypt, becoming the builder gods who worked in primeval times. What do you think about the biblical story of Noah? Is the Bible really accurate? Or there is a more mysterious story behind all of this that can reveal finally the true history of human civilization? As we know, Thoth himself has played a huge role in the ancient legends about the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Over the centuries, he has been called by many names. 3 times the Great, Hermes Trismegistus. He's even equated with Surit, Idris, or the biblical Enoch. He often is depicted with the head of an ibis from the stork family, which of course is a sacred bird in Egypt. On one hand, to the ancient Egyptians, he was the guardian of the ancient wisdom, but on the other hand, he was looked upon as the Lord of Time. The library in his temple was very famous in Heliopolis. It is said that there was information about the secret tunnels on papyri written by Thoth himself. He had a few special items, as they called them, which helped him use the great power. These were, for example, a magic mirror in which he could see objects in a great distance, a listening and singing bird with whose help he learned all the news from far away, and from the ancient inscriptions we understand that he himself came to Earth with his ship, as it is called. He had been assigned to administer justice when the gods and men multiplied to such an extent that regulations were needed, and also praised his wisdom, which he transcribed and organized the services and the sacrifice offerings. He taught people how to write and also the art of speech. He learned the servants how to take care of the palaces and temples of the gods and kings. And so nothing was forgotten by his wisdom, even the art of handicraft, weaving, braiding, hunting, agriculture, and so on. Over time, Thoth was mixed with many other names, but all conclusions lead to the same thing. Thoth and even Enoch are real entities from a very distant time who came to Earth and brought people knowledge, culture, and science. Enoch tells a lot about a life contact with God's Elohim, who we will discuss in other episodes, and how he repeatedly left the earth with their flying machines. Thoth himself tells something that's worth hearing, and of course, anyone can draw their own conclusion. There will come a time the Egyptians will pray to their gods in vain, and all their sacraments will remain fruitless, because the gods will have left Egypt and flew away from heaven. Egypt will be orphaned after it is abandoned by all its gods. Then in the country, foreign people will come and rule. They will prevent the Egyptians from carrying out the old worship services that they are used to, and will punish those who are found secretly serving the old gods. Then that country, which was the most pious in the world, will become godless, will be filled not with temples but with tombs, not with gods but with corpses, and the country will be depopulated, not only from the gods but also from the Egyptians. The oldest designation of the Egyptian goddess of the sky, Nut, is Mehet Veret, which means the great tide. However, outside of this exist many legends, such as those of Harris Papyrus, as well as the inscriptions in the temple of Edfu, which tell of the water calamity. A hieratic myth from the 13th century BC and translated in 1932 by Professor Alan Gardner also describes a high tide. As opposed to the Old Testament and the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Egyptian Noah, Utnapishtim, or the Chosen One to survive and lead humanity to Egypt, this time is the goddess of fertility, which in character resembles the deity Osiris. In order to restrain the violence of the sea, the goddess sends a bird that hurries to Isis. Then, Isis decides to help and talk to her father Ptah. Finally, Ptah decided to calm the sea with the help of the god of the weather, Set. In this regard, it seems that the legacy of Pharaoh Ramses III regarding the Book of the Celestial Cow, a direct connection with the biblical legend of the flood. With his published work in 1982, The Egyptian Myth of the Heaven Cow, Professor Eric Hornung provides the most understandable objective translation of this story. It begins during the Golden Age era when the gods still have watched directly over people. This is the time when people and gods were still united and lived in full harmony, but for inexplicable reasons at some point, harmony and the worship of the gods just ended. However, notice that the relationship was not violated by the gods, but by us, humans. In this direction of thought, we probably deserved the Great Flood. From the myth of Horus, we know about the period already mentioned, the uprising of our ancestors, that caused the Great Flood. Reportedly, 18,000 years BC at that time, the deity of Ra was already old and called for his grandson Heru Bekhdeti. Horus rushed to come faster than he defeated the demigods and the human enemies of Ra, as from Lower Nubia to the south to the sea coast up the north, pushed out Ra's enemies from one battlefront to the other with a flying machine. Heru Bekhdeti flew to the horizon like a great winged sun. That is why he is still called the great god and lord of heaven. After he saw the enemies from heaven, he swooped in front of their faces a huge bee. He furiously aimed his sting against them. After that, they could no longer see anything. At the meeting of the gods, it already had been decided that Horus could use people against people. Another mysterious magical weapon called the Divine Eye of Ra. Open his eyes to exterminate those who have fought rivals against you. Nowadays, Egyptologists believe that the Eye of Ra is not only part of Ra's body, but according to the legends, it was a separate being. There are legends according to which the eye came into use to be an execution of an order to destroy enemies or to search for something in specific. From the Mesopotamian cuneiform, we learn more interesting details of what happened. After the gods have created people in the Mesopotamian frame of mythology, of course, life flowed in constant harmony and everything was wonderful. But the brother of Ea, Enlil, who was from the very beginning against the artificial creation of humans in the time of the Golden Age, suspiciously resigned. When few of the divine retinue also began to form intersexual relationships with the human daughters, and they were the last straw. Enlil and Ra in the Egyptian mythology called the Council of the Gods, where they publicly complained. The country expanded and the people increased, multiplying like wild bulls. Their multiplication angered God. God Enlil heard their words and said to the great gods, "Unpleasant are people's words. Their multiplication stole my sleep." and that coincidence a lot of the history of Sumerian civilization for their Anunnaki gods. If you haven't watched the Anunnaki episode, there will be a link in the description. Watch it so that you can make connections. It's very interesting. In the beginning, not the Great Flood was the one that befell people, but the contagious diseases that caused pain and fever. People prayed to god Ea, who can be identified as god Ra, for his help. Ea, O Lord, mankind groans. The wrath of the gods destroys the country, but you are the one who created us. Put an end to the suffering of disease, of fever. In any case, Ra initially destroys the destructive plan of Set against the people, similarly to Horus in the Egyptian version, causes several events. However, this has made Enlil even angrier, and he again complained to the great gods. People do not decrease, their number is more than ever. In his second plan, which this time he realized with the help of the Great Ones, Enlil tries to destroy humans with thirst and hunger, which lasts 7 years. During these tough times, people went so wild that they began to stalk their only friend deity Ra and even attacked him, but despite the damage, Ra soon realized that people could do nothing against the divine powers. That made him so sad, he even cried. It got to the point that even Ea himself urged people to no longer submit to the gods. Imagine what it would be like if we lived in that time. Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets even give us astronomical indication of the time of the Great Flood, which in contrast from the Egyptian legend stated that about 1,000 years earlier. The constellation Lion measured the water of waters. This corresponds to the period of the great melting of the glaciers that took place at the end of the last ice age, and it's confirmed by today's science. When the flood ended, most of humanity had died out and written testimonies of ancient times were gone. The few survivors fell into the phase of primitiveness, which initially started with cannibalism, and they again tried to stay to the water as hunters and gatherers. A very interesting experiment that is more than 2,600 years old, carried out ancient Egypt, shows that the children who were isolated go wild, and without human intervention they can't learn to speak. In the 7th century BC, the pharaoh Psamtik I commanded 2 newborn children to be clothed and be carried by a shepherd for 2 years. However, he wasn't allowed to talk to them. 2 years later, the children could say a single word, and that was the word Bekus, which means bread. For the pharaoh, that the primary language of mankind was Phrygian, though the children apparently imitated only the bleating of the sheep. In the first volume, chapters 1 and 5, the historian Diodorus of Sicily deals with the elimination of cannibalism, which also remained in the primitive population of the Nile Valley. At that distant time, man was still a primitive creature, and the gods unlearned the humans to eat each other. The gods in question here are the well-known messengers of the culture that suddenly reappear and bring new, after the flood, civilizations. And these 7 personalities that could be found in almost every culture, their appearance coincidence with the creation of the dynasty of Thoth, where the Egyptian god chooses 7 priest scholars and trusts them the divine knowledge, as a result of which they become sages. From the Egyptian Book of Hell 1 and 3, we learn that the first one of these 7 sages is called Osiris, while the other 6 seem to have names of fish. This points to a meetings with the culture of the African Dogon people. The second of these mysterious sages entities bears the name of Mogul type, and number 4 the name also meaning catfish. For the 5th and the 7th, the common name for fish is used, while the names of 3rd and the 6th cannot be clearly identified. Furthermore, there are 7 sages not only in Egypt with Noah among the Mesoamerican peoples, for example, but also with the Hindus as well as with the Babylonians, all of whom appear after a great flood and bring the new culture with them. They're always responsible for the new beginning, and in the Hindus they're called rishis. In Babylonians, the word is Apkallu. Apkallu is an approximate translation of the Great One that leads us. The older Sumerian designation of these sages is Ap-Gab, which means a master who shows the path. It is interesting that the only model of Egyptian drone preserved until today is stored and locked in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. It's from the 3rd century BC and was opened on May 12, 1898 by French archaeologists in Sahara. This model of an airplane carries the inscription of Padi Imen, which means approximately a gift from the sages. What is constantly missed by modern researchers in regards to the Mesoamerican messengers of culture is the nickname of these mysterious visitors, Roja Lak, which can be translated as Master of the Great Flat Shell. And here comes the interesting question: are these UFO-like flying ships? In the Egyptian Book of Dead, aphorism 17209 says that the supreme god Ra, who is in the egg, Ra who swims in his heavenly shell. Yet, something interesting in ancient Egypt, the word Sehem is a symbol of power through which were observed stars, called in ancient Egyptian text the beings between the gods and the people. Sehem is repeatedly described as a separate being who stands on the same level as the gods. The function of this subject for modern Egyptologists to this day remains a mystery, although some believe that exactly there is hidden the key to Galileo Galilei's cosmic observations. They interpreted Sehem only like an ordinary ruler's scepter, without taking into account the power that, according to legend, lives in the wand in question, and is not just a stick that symbolizes the power of the ruler. Because of the power to see hidden in Sehem can be explained one of the nicknames of Osiris, which is the Great Sehem who lives in heavens. In his book, The Last Judgment Began Long Ago by Eric von Däniken reveals the possibilities that we've been visited in the past by representatives of alien civilization. Such a possibly for some seems quite great fiction, but for others it is an obvious fact. He says the following: "We do the same, but not in a genetic way that we're only now taking on, but in a way of selection. We have bred Swiss and German cows, which are now grazing in the tropical climate of Kenya. We mixed breeds of oxen to get more sustainable cows with higher milk. We crossed sheep and goats. We raised and mixed varieties of rapeseed, wheat and other plants to adapt them to their new environment, and today we're just about to produce varieties of vegetables genetically, and God knows more what will come to our scientists in this field, and whether suddenly we won't find a genetic path creating a man who will live 240 years. That's how hybrid monsters emerged, creatures like no other on the globe. People spoke excitedly about them. They were amazed, feared the divine creatures, and after they died or were destroyed by the flood, the horrible animals immediately moved in the people's memory, turned into myths and legends told of distant times when the gods created hybrids." Around 80% of mythology of the ancient Aztecs, Indians, Sumerians, Egyptians, Maya, Assyrians, Indians, South American civilizations, and so on depict the same captivating story about alien gods who create the man and take care of his survival. The common between them is that there is a creation, that is existence, and cycles of the earthly orb, each of them ending in a devastating cataclysm mechanism that is needed for all human civilization so that it can pass to the next stage of its development. The great gods, according to the ancient, descended from the sky to extract the most durable electrolyte metal known in chemistry as gold. Egypt called the gold the skin of the gods. They who descended to earth then created a man. In Sumer, there written evidence of the creation of man to be a worker in their gold mines. It turns out, according to some people, that the most ancient gold mines and even the most ancient rulers are in Bulgaria. The creation of the cosmic order is precisely the beginning of time. It is when the calendar was born. In the Balkans, there is such a calendar which is located in Magura cave. The images dating from the 8th to 9th century BC, and according to the Spaniards, they're over 9,000 years old and have their analogies with drawings from prehistoric centers in Italy, the Iberian Peninsula, and from Asia. Ancient Babylonian legend tells that the 7 sages have lived before the Great Flood and erected the walls of the sacred city of Uruk. According to Sumerian Civilization, En-men-Durana is the 7th king prior to the flood who ruled in Sippar for a period of 6 rounds on the planet Nibiru before becoming a high priest and receiving the name En-men-Dur-Anki. We know of the planet Nibiru and the Sumerian civilization, which claim to have received all their knowledge and technology thanks to the Anunnaki, which came exactly from this planet. In the Book of Enoch, the same king is named Uriel, who reveals to Enoch the secrets of the sun and the laws of the moon, and finally, Uriel gives him the heavenly plates by guiding him to study them very carefully and thoughtfully. The interesting thing is that when we come across the 7 sages in different ancient myths, they're always enlightened and have survived a huge cataclysm which destroyed almost the entire planet, and then they built the foundations of the new age of mankind. In addition to all of this, the inscriptions in Edfu say that they came from a small island where the first people lived, but they fled from there because of the Great Flood. Most of the residents drowned and the few survivors settled in Egypt, as they did turn into the gods' builders who worked in this ancient time. Extremely strange and somehow admirable is that these stories are so jumbled, and yet they lead us to the same conclusion, that the ancients knew a lot more than us, and no matter what names they were called by, it is a fact that, and to this day we talk, argue and take an interest in them, proves that they managed to preserve this knowledge. In what form, of course, and to what extent, we cannot be sure, but ancient writings like the Emerald Tablets, the Book of Enoch, the Book of People, Gods, and Heops, and many others suggest that our civilization is much stronger and more powerful than it is presented today, and that we really have a huge role in the history of the creation of the whole universe. What do you think about the 7 wise men from Edfu? We'll be happy to read and discuss with you down in the comments below. We bow before you and thank you for watching another episode of Secret Origins. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.